Welcome to Sleepless Historian, where history isn't shouted through trumpets and timelines, but whispered softly through smoke, candlelight, and memory. Tonight, we'll step quietly into a world that looks familiar in paintings, yet feels utterly alien once you breathe its air. This is medieval life, a time of kings and plagues of faith, and filth of prayers whispered through coughs and frost. And before you say, I could survive that, let's see how long you'd last. Because in this world, lasting a single day is already a miracle. You wake up on something that shouldn't be called a bed, a pile of straw and wool damp, with the sweat of every night before. The air smells of smoke, wood, and livestock, a scent that clings to your lungs as if soap has never been invented. Outside, a rooster screams like it's angry at the sky. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries, a dog barks, and a man coughs, a cough that sounds older than he is. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you see wooden beams blackened by years of smoke. The only window is a small hole covered with oiled cloth, and the blanket scratching your skin feels more like punishment than comfort. You try to sit up, and a cloud of dust rises around you. The floor isn't wood, but packed earth, damp, uneven, and cold. Someone opens the door. A blast of icy air rushes in, and a woman steps inside. Her hands are cracked, her face carved by years of work and wind. She mutters something that sounds like, "Up, sun's out." You don't understand the words, but her tone leaves no room for questions. You're not a guest here. You're one of them. When you step outside, the morning greets you with grey light and a silence full of sound. The soft squelch of mud underfoot, the hiss of smoke from low, crooked roofs, the clatter of buckets being dragged toward the well. Pigs shuffle through puddles. Chickens dart between feet. A man drags a cart of firewood across the mud, its wheels screaming with every turn. In the distance, a church bell tolls deep and slow. It doesn't tell time, it gives orders. Every sound here belongs to someone, the bell to the priest, the whip to the reeve, the voice to the Lord who owns this land, and everything crawling on it, including you. Children run past barefoot, laughing in short bursts, as if laughter itself must be rationed. Their faces are thin, their hair tangled their skin, pale beneath a layer of dust. They wave at you and then vanish into the mist, like ghosts who forgot they're still alive. This is the rhythm of medieval life. Repetition, obedience, endurance. Each day a copy of the last, and each night a small rehearsal for death. The people here don't dream of the future. They pray it will look exactly like the present, only with fewer funerals. The cold doesn't sting, it settles. It climbs into your bones and stays there, quiet and patient. Your clothes are rough wool, heavy and itchy, and they smell faintly of smoke and animal fat. A small fire burns in the hut behind you, but the smoke doesn't rise. It rolls across the ceiling, thick and grey, before slipping through a hole in the roof. Everyone here coughs, and everyone here calls that normal. You look down at your hands, already cracked and darkened by dirt, and realise that in this world, even stillness feels like labour. Breakfast, if it can be called, that is a pot of grey mush simmering over the coals. The woman stirs it with a stick, blackened at the end, and ladles a portion into a wooden bowl. You taste it, it's warm water, pretending to be food, without salt, sweetness, or mercy. She watches you eat as if making sure you don't waste the privilege. Someone sneezes nearby, and another crosses themselves and murmurs a prayer. Here germs aren't the threat, God is. Illness is not a diagnosis, but a verdict. People don't ask what made them sick, they ask why. He allowed it. You step outside again and hear the thud of hooves. A knight rides past armour, dull beneath the clouds, his banner dragging through the mud. No one dares look up. Peasants bend their heads automatically, as if their necks have learned the posture through generations. You do the same. He doesn't glance your way. Why would he? In this world, peasants are not people. They're part of the scenery. The land feeds them, taxes them, buries them. Their names vanish as quickly as footprints in the rain. You walk through the village and start to understand that survival here isn't measured in days or years, but in meals, in breaths, in how long you can keep moving before something hunger, fever, war, or faith catches up. You feel a dull ache in your stomach, not from hunger alone, but from the slow realization that everything around you is fragile and yet somehow eternal. Every wooden door, every cracked hand, every broken prayer has been repeated so many times that even misery has become tradition. By now, you've been awake for just 1 hour in the Middle Ages. Your stomach growls, your hands are numb, your clothes damp with cold. The air tastes of ash and earth. You can already sense that this world doesn't care if you're clever, kind, or brave, only if you endure. And endurance here means obedience. You work when told, kneel when told, die when told. Still, amid the filth and frost, you catch moments of strange beauty, a child's laugh echoing through fog sunlight, trembling on the surface of a puddle, the quiet dignity of hands that never stop moving. Maybe that's how people survived this place. Not by comfort, but by small sparks of grace they never dared to name. And so your first morning in medieval life begins grey, cold, relentless, and real. The bell rings again, calling everyone to their duties, and the village exhales like a living thing made of mud and prayer. Somewhere far away, a crow cries. You realize the day has only started, and already you feel centuries old. Before we walk deeper into the mud through hunger and faith and the quiet cruelty that held this world together, take a moment to breathe. If you enjoy wandering through history at this slower pace where each story lingers like candle smoke and each voice from the past whispers you towards sleep, remember to like this video, subscribe to Sleepless Historian, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next quiet descent into the past. Because in a world this dark, sometimes the softest voice is the only light that survives. Morning in the mud. The bell calls again low and patient, and the village answers with movement that looks almost like waking, but is really obligation, putting on its boots. You follow the woman back into the hut, where the pot over the embers has thickened into something that clings to the spoon. She hands you a bowl and a heel of yesterday's bread, dark and hard. When you dip it, the crust softens just enough to remind you that mercy here is measured in small changes of texture. Steam rises with the smell of oats and smoke. Someone passes a clay cup of small beer, flat and faintly sour. It isn't meant to delight you. It is meant to be safer than water. Outside, the light hasn't brightened so much as the mist has thinned. You are shown how to shoulder a yoke and hook 2 pails to it. The wood rides your collarbones like a lesson you should have learned in another life. The path to the well is a sketch of footprints and hooves, each step sinking until it decides to stay. Chickens scatter, pigs argue. A goose considers biting you and thinks better of it. At the well you wait as others fill their buckets, the rope groaning against the wheel. When your turn comes, the bucket drops and knocks the water with a hollow slap. You draw, you lift, you spill. A girl shows you the trick steady first, then pull. She smiles without teeth and runs away laughing. Back at the hut, the woman gestures toward a trough and the cow beside it. You pour water, bring a bundle of hay, stroke the animal's warm flank, because warmth is a kind of hope. The barn is no barn, only the other half of the hut divided by a rough fence of wattle. Your bed and the cow's bed share the same breath. In the corner, a hand quern weights its stones, worn to the shape of need. You turn it as you were shown slow circles grinding grain into meal, the sound like sand telling time. Somewhere a dog sleeps so hard it barks in its dream. When the bell marks prime, the reeve passes down the lane, counting bodies and glancing at hands. Work is owed today on the Lord's demesne. The pattern of your life is woven into land you do not own. He nods at you the way one nods at a rake useful, if it behaves replaceable, if it breaks. You are given a mattock and sent where the stubble waits for ungloved hands. The fields stretch outward in long strips, the hedges ragged with winter, the ditch holding a narrow ribbon of brown water that does not pretend to be clean. You take your place in a line of bent backs. The first swing is a question. The second is an answer your shoulders don't like. The third is a promise your lungs can't keep. After 20, your breath is bargaining. The ground gives up stones like a miser gives up coins. You carry them to a pile that looks older than the village. A boy rattles past with a barrow, its wheel wobbling like a drunk memory. He grins at you as if exhaustion were a game he's good at. Across the lane a plough team moves with the deliberation of saints' oxen leaning into the wooden beam while a man coaxes the iron through clay. He whistles 4 notes over and over. In that small tune is everything he can control. By mid-morning your hands are speaking a language you never meant to learn. Skin splits where tool meets palm. Mud works itself under nails and stays. Someone passes a lump of curds wrapped in cloth. It tastes of salt and animal and effort. You chew until the ache in your jaw feels honest. A woman near you hums as she works the melody, climbing and falling like breath at prayer. On the far side of the strips, the manor house looks down with timbered calm. Smoke from its chimney rises clean. You try not to think about bread that is soft on the inside and never needs to be dipped. The miller's boy makes his rounds with a sack slung over his shoulder and a pouch at his belt for toll. He calls out offers to grind for those who have grain his voice, carrying above the clink and scrape of tools. No one meets his eyes for long. The mill takes its share and gives flour. Fairness here is a math problem that always rounds up for someone else. Down in the hollow, the stream that turns the mill wheel glitters as if it were innocent. A woman beats linen against a flat stone with a wooden paddle. She laughs at a joke you don't catch, then coughs, then laughs again. The wind lifts the edges of her scarf and then puts them down. When you are sent to fetch more water, you follow a footpath to the commons, where geese complain about everything, and children practice the art of getting away with it. The sky is a sheet of pewter pressed close. On the hill, a figure stands briefly like a mark. In a margin, a shepherd with his staff, motionless, except for the dog at his heel, black against the grass. He turns. He becomes a part of distance again. In this place, belonging is not something you feel. It is something that happens to you if you stay alive long enough. Someone calls your name, though you aren't sure you were given one. You turn anyway. A neighbour thrusts a bundle of kindling into your arms, the thin sticks that mean the difference between fire and what looks like fire. You carry them back against your chest. Splinters write small messages in your skin. When you push through the hut's low door, the smoke greets you like a relative you owe money. The woman nods at the wood, but points to the pottage again, this time with a few leaves that think about being green and change their mind. She sprinkles a pinch of something over the top that hides, then returns as scent. For a moment, the room smells like a place where a story might happen. You eat with a wooden spoon that refuses to be clean. The bread you soften breaks along old fault lines. No one speaks much. Words are stored for when they buy something. A baby fusses and is quieted with a finger to gnaw. A cat appears without having arrived coils by the hearth and keeps one eye open for rats that keep two eyes open for everything. The fire cracks a sentence you don't understand. There is a latrine at the edge of the village, a pit with a plank. You learn it because you must. The wind there is louder, the sky wider. On the way back, you pass the tithe barn, its door hung open like a mouth. Inside the church's portion stacks itself into the future. You feel small for reasons that have nothing to do with size. At a crossroads of paths, nobody paved, a wooden cross leans and refuses to fall. Someone has left a sprig of something green at its base. You do not touch it. Work resumes, because work is what the hours are for. You carry, you pull, you lift, you set down. From the hedgerow comes the bright, scolding shout of a robin. A fox-shaped absence moves along the far fence and vanishes into the fur of the day. Your arms take on the simple intelligence of repetition. Time stops being a line and becomes a wheel. You go where it takes you. Once, just once, you stand up straight and let your back unbend. The world rushes into your eyes. Lanes, forking to other lanes. Roofs, trying to be roofs. Smoke writing and unwriting its name against the air. You notice the church door is open. Inside candles make a small geography of light. A man kneels head bowed, lips moving. You do not know his prayer. You know its shape. By the time the bell sounds again, the sun has not moved far, but the day has. You return the mattock with hands that feel older than morning. The reeve ticks a mark on a tally stick and doesn't look up. Your reward is that no one says your name. It is safer than money. The woman takes your sleeve and squeezes once approval or simply the test of cloth. Together, you carry the last of the water inside. The cow breathes out. The cat decides the hearth is hers. You sit on the edge of the straw and discover that sitting is the day's only luxury. Your heart slows. Your fingers sting where the splits have begun to crust. You think without meaning to of the life where a hot tap answered to your hand and a light came at the touch of a switch. The thought arrives shivering like a traveller at the door, and you send it away. Here comfort is not a memory, it is a rumour. When the wind pushes at the walls, the whole hut mutters and settles. A thin sun slips its coin of light under the door and leaves it there. Somewhere a laugh breaks, and then the scold of a mother mends it. The village inhales and exhales around you made of mud and breath, and promises no one has time to make. You do not know what will happen after noon. Only that noon will come because the bell will say so. And for now, you have done what is asked of a body that wants to remain, a body you have worked, you have swallowed, you have obeyed. In medieval life, that is what mourning means. The Feudal Pyramid. The bell tolls again deeper now, as if the sound itself has weight. It moves through the village, like wind through reeds, bending everyone a little. The morning work ends not because the people are tired, but because the sound tells them they are. The woman who has claimed you as one of hers wipes her hands on her apron and murmurs something about the reeve. You don't catch the words, only the tone worry mixed with the rhythm of habit. Outside the path toward the manor is already thick with footprints. Peasants gather in slow knots, carrying baskets and sacks the smell of grain and damp wool, mixing with the smoke of hearths left behind. The reeve stands near the crossroads, a thin man with a face like parchment and a stick he taps against his boot. He's not cruel. Exactly cruelty takes imagination, but he's a small man, filled with borrowed power. Behind him waits the steward, dressed better, riding a horse that steams in the cold air. Today, someone whispers, is the Lord's collection day. The line moves, you follow. A woman ahead of you clutches a chicken to her chest. Its eyes roll like coins. Another man pushes a small cart piled with turnips. He mutters to himself, counting what he owes, then subtracting what his children can spare. The closer you get, the quieter everything becomes, until the only sounds are the horse snorting and the creak of baskets settling. When it's your turn, you set down the small sack. The woman gave you grain, still warm from your body, where you carried it under your cloak. The steward doesn't look at your face. He opens the sack, pinches a bit of grain, rubs it between his fingers and frowns. Light, he says, though you can't know the word. The reeve translates it with a gesture of disapproval that transcends language. You start to speak, but the woman steps forward, bows her head, says something quickly. The steward grunts. He waves his hand. The reeve marks something on a wooden tally stick and pushes it into the mud at your feet. Proof you've paid. Proof too that you owe. Behind you, someone isn't as lucky. The sound of a slap cracks the air. A child cries. The reeve stick finds another purpose. No one looks up. Everyone pretends not to see. The steward moves on, already thinking of lunch, which will be warm and plentiful, and eaten in a room without smoke. You walk back down the lane with the woman, the mud, clinging to your shoes as if it doesn't want to let go. She says nothing. She doesn't have to. You understand that survival here depends less on strength and more on silence. The manor rises at the edge of the village, half stone, half arrogance. A wooden palisade surrounds it more for show than defence, though to you it looks impenetrable. Smoke from its chimney drifts upward in a single perfect column, straight, unbroken, clean. Even the smoke seems better fed. The Lord himself doesn't appear. He doesn't have to. His presence is a concept, a rumour that rules through intermediaries, the steward, the reeve, the fear, that everyone carries like a second skin. Beyond the manor stretches the domain, the Lord's own fields where the best soil lies. You glimpse workers bent double among the furrows, their backs a row of lowercase letters spelling obedience. They wear the same rough wool as you, but here, under the eye of the reeve, even the air feels owned. You remember what the woman told you earlier, or what you think she told you every man and woman born here owes service to the land. Not rent, not wages service. The Lord owns the field, the crops, the animals, and the time between dawn and dusk. You belong to all of it, in the same way a cart belongs to its wheel. A group of men passes, carrying bundles of firewood toward the manor. One of them jokes softly, a nervous joke about the weight of sin and taxation. The others laugh the way people laugh when they're not sure they're allowed. You almost smile, but the reeve glances your way, and the laughter dies in your throat. At the edge of the path stands a small boy, no older than 10, holding a wooden tray with loaves of bread for the workers. They're rough uneven, the kind that break teeth before breaking apart. You take one nod in thanks, and notice how quickly his eyes drop. Deference is learned young here, so is hunger. When you eat, the bread tastes faintly of ash and hope. Around you, conversations start and stop like frightened birds. Someone mentions a new tax from the king, for war, for peace, for something in between. No one knows where the money goes. It disappears into the distance, like smoke into sky. You think of your world, the one you left behind, and realize that bureaucracy has always been an art form, the art of taking without asking. The afternoon passes in a rhythm that feels both ancient and efficient. The reeve walks the fields tally stick in hand, checking that each family sends the right number of workers. At the edge of a ditch, 2 old men repair a fence with patient resentment. A group of women gather reeds from the marsh, their skirts heavy with water, their laughter soft but real. For a moment, the world looks almost gentle until you notice the bruises on one woman's wrist, the bandage on another's ankle. Labor here is not a choice. It's the price of being counted among the living. By mid-afternoon, clouds roll in from the west, thick and low. The reeve signals that it's time to stop. The workers stand, stretch, cross themselves. Some spit into the earth, a small rebellion that no one names. You return the mattock to its place and watch the steward ride back toward the manor. His horse's hooves splash through puddles that look like mirrors, breaking every reflection. As the villagers drift homeward, you fall into step beside an older man who carries a bundle of tools on his shoulder. His beard is grey, his eyes pale the colour of fog. He speaks a few words to you in a slow, musical tone. You catch fragments, service, Lord God. He points to the manor, then to the church, then to the sky, making a triangle with his finger. You nod. He nods back, as if to say, that's all there is hierarchy, without end. In the village square, though, square is too neat. A woman sits by a wooden post, spinning wool on a drop spindle. The thread twists between her fingers, thin as breath, strong as habit. You watch her for a moment, and think this too is part of the pyramid. Even stillness is labour. Even creation serves someone else. The reeve makes one last round before dusk. He stops at each door, checking for compliance, recording what he sees on a strip of wood carved with notches. Each family, each house, each animal reduced to marks you could mistake for random scratches if you didn't know they were counting lives. He stops at your hut. The woman steps forward, hands folded, eyes down. He glances inside, sees you sitting by the hearth, and writes another mark. Then he leaves. The door closes, and silence returns like a favour. You sit near the fire, listening to the wood sigh as it burns. The woman mends a tear in her sleeve with thread so fine it looks like spider silk. The child beside her traces shapes in the ashes, drawing what might be a house or a dream. Outside, the wind changes, carrying with it the faint echo of the bell from the manor chapel, a reminder that even prayer has a schedule. In the flickering light, you think about the shape of this society, a pyramid built not of stone, but of lives stacked carefully generation after generation. At the top, the few who command. At the bottom, the many who endure. And yet the structure holds because everyone believes it must. The Lord believes God made him noble. The peasant believes God made him poor. The priest believes he translates between them. The reeve believes he keeps the balance. And somewhere in that balance history convinces itself it's fair. You wonder how many of these people ever imagined another way of living. The old man's triangle returns to your mind manor church sky. You realize that for most here there is no outside to that shape. Freedom isn't something lost, it's something that never existed. The fire crackles. The cow shifts in its stall. The woman hums a song you don't recognize, low and round like comfort, learning to whisper. You lie back on the straw and stare at the beams above you, black with years of smoke. The air tastes of ash and wool, and the faint sweetness of grain drying somewhere unseen. Tomorrow will be the same. The bell, the mud, the tally stick the bread. The pyramid doesn't change shape. It only grows heavier with time. But for now, you are still here, not free, not safe, but alive, suspended between duty and dusk. Outside, the bell tolls once more, softer now, as if it's closing its own eyes. And beneath that sound, the village exhales the collective breath of 100 people who have learned to mistake survival for peace. Food, filth, and fatigue. By the time the light lifts itself to what passes for noon, your body has learned the village's alphabet mud smoke hunger repetition. The woman tips the last of the morning's pottage into a smaller pot, adds a few leaves that were green last year and a heel of onion, then sets it back beside the embers to think about being lunch. The smell that rises is not delicious, but it is persuasive. In medieval life, persuasion is often what food does instead of flavour. She hands you a crust to scrape clean the sides of a wooden bowl, and you discover a truth. Everyone here knows bread is a tool before it is a pleasure. It softens when you press it against heat. It thickens broth. It gathers what would otherwise escape. The loaf is dark and stubborn, made of rye and barley and whatever else survived the miller's toll. Your teeth complain, and the bread does not apologize. Somewhere behind you, the cow shifts and breathes a warm animal fog across your back. You find yourself stepping slightly toward it the way a cold hand reaches for a cup. Water is a story the village tells carefully. The well is not a friend, it is a bargain. The bucket brings up a sour, metallic taste that no one remarks on. Then someone pours a thin beer into your cup and nods as if a point has been proven. The beer is flat and faintly sour, a liquid argument against the dangers of the well. It will not make you happy. It will make you safe enough. The alewife, 2 houses over, brews it in a pot that looks older than any oath, skimming and stirring and tapping a finger against the rim when the steam speaks in the right voice. She measures by memory and seasons by rumour. The church fasts mark meatless days. The brew marks all of them. Hunger here isn't drama, it's arithmetic. There is enough and there is not quite. The hungry gap, those weeks when last year's stores sulk in corners and the new crops are still thinking about the future, teaches its lesson every spring. You learn to chew slowly and agree with the lesson. Children press fingers into loaves to test softness the way other children elsewhere test snow. Men in the fields pocket turnips when no one looks. Women add a pinch more salt and call it kindness. In the corner of the hut rests a small cheese, wrapped in cloth, turned daily guarded, with the suspicion people reserve for fragile good fortune. On market days, the village knits itself to the world with a crooked thread. You walk the track with others, baskets on arms, and smells arrive before the stalls. Do onions, proud of what they are smoked. Fish, bragging loudly. Hides and wool, insisting on their opinions. The square is not a square, but everyone agrees to call it one. Traders from 2 valleys over spread out their lives on planks, salt that remembers an ocean iron nails that promise to hold something together, earthen pots, whose lips are chipped by stories. A woman with a thin face and a sharp laugh sells herbs tied, in patient bundles, yarrow for wounds, rosemary for courage, mint for breath that lives too close to yesterday. You buy nothing, which is a kind of purchase your emptier purse understands. A fishmonger lifts the lid on his barrel. The smell slaps you like an old acquaintance. He names the river as if it were a pedigree, and describes the smoke as if it were a sacrament. You stare at the fish a second too long. He reads your face and shakes his head. Tomorrow, he says, without your language, and you nod in his. Salt is currency, and so is hesitation. Elsewhere in the square, a tanner has laid out leather that once belonged to animals with opinions about rivers. His hands hold the ghost of their arguments. You smell the urine used to cure the hides, and you realize that in this economy, even waste earns its keep. There is honey if you can afford sweetness, which you cannot. There are apples if you can afford memory, which you also cannot. There is a pie, its crust cracked, like a good joke. You look away before longing becomes expensive. A boy rushes past with a bundle of reeds. A girl counts pennies into her palm, then counts them again because hope is a nervous accountant. 2 old men argue about weights. A priest steps between them and turns their quarrel into a shared silence. When the bell in the church tower shakes the air, everyone pauses. God interrupts hunger often enough to get credit for the days when he doesn't. Back home, the woman scours the pot with a handful of ash and a stubborn cloth. Soap exists here, but like a legend, You can't live on thin cakes of lye and tallow that sting the skin and make hands remember them for hours. Linen underclothes take the worst of the body's confessions. They are beaten against flat stones, then rinsed in water that resists becoming clean. The outer wool rarely meets more than smoke, which gives it a dignity called seasoning. You wash your face because it is the part of you the world will see, and your hands because they touch the world. The rest can wait. The rest usually does. A louse proves that waiting is not a strategy. It travels the seam of your shirt with professional focus and does not flinch when you notice. The woman pinches it, cracks it, wipes her fingers on her apron, and continues threading a needle. She has done this so often it no longer qualifies as an event. Later, she parts her child's hair with the seriousness of a librarian and hunts for the pale commas of knits. Fatigue is not always falling down. Sometimes it is sitting perfectly still with an intention that never gets loud. The hut has a way of collecting smells, like medals, smoke first, then beasts, then sweat, then the sour certainty of old straw. On washing days, the bundle of linen flutters from a line like a mild rebellion. When rain comes in shy or rude, the line sags and the cloth learns patience it did not ask for. Under the bedstraw live flee kingdoms that do not acknowledge taxation. You lift a corner and let it fall, because knowledge is not always power. Teeth are a rumour of the past and a promise of pain. A woman in the village knows how to pull them with a pair of iron pincers that argue with everything they meet. She charges in bread, in gratitude, in favours the future will have to honour. Vinegar sits in a jug as a tonic, a mouthwash, a potion that makes even water feel supervised. When you rinse, your gums flare awake as if offended at being remembered. You swish, you spit, you swear fidelity to the part of your mouth that still believes in kindness. Bathing here is an event the way eclipses are, events people mention when one happened and no one expects another soon. In town there are bathhouses where steam wraps people in temporary forgiveness, and the talk is louder than the water. In the village, you negotiate with a copper basin and a cloth warming water in mugs, testing it with knuckles, the way someone somewhere once tested milk. You wipe your neck and your wrists and the insides of your elbows. You feel both lighter and newly aware of what remains. An old man mutters that hot water opens the skin and invites misfortune. He has lived long enough for you to respect his superstition. You dry carefully at the hearth and try to persuade your shirt to share your new opinion of cleanliness. It does not. Fatigue arrives not as collapse, but as an untied knot. It loosens your posture first, then your thoughts, then the tightness with which you hold your name. Afternoon leans toward evening. The light gets thoughtful in the doorway. You peel a splinter from your palm and hold it up to the window hole, as if reading a tiny biography. The cat returns from patrol with a mouth that pretends it wasn't full a moment ago. The child rubs his eyes with the backs of his wrists and is sent to look for something that doesn't matter because searching is a way to practice finding. For supper, the pottage has become itself thicker, more certain, newly affiliated with a turnip's personality. Someone drops in a handful of barley and declares it feast enough. You tear off a piece of bread and dip, trying to get the angle right the way the others do without looking. The spoon leaves a path that closes politely behind it. When the pot empties, the woman sets it crooked on the hearthstone to remind it there will be a morning. She pours a cup of small beer and passes it to you, and then to the child, and then to herself. The same way she would pass a sentence in a language the body speaks fluently. Outside the latrine keeps its appointment with the wind. You hold your breath or try to, and discover how long a minute can be when it argues with your lungs. Night's first draft moves through the hedges. A fox writes its soft signature near the chicken coop. You listen and imagine a chain that runs from everything to everything else, from the fox to the coop, to the eggs, to the pottage, to the hand that stirred it, to the ash that cleaned the bowl, to the water that refused to be trusted. It is not a beautiful chain, but it holds. When you return to the hut, the woman is picking pebbles from a bowl of grain, her fingertips reading for errors. The child sleeps in a posture that suggests negotiation with angels. The cow has settled into the shape of patience. You sit, and the straw accepts you with all the grace of something that cannot get worse. Your hands remember the quern. Your shoulders remember the yoke. Your mouth remembers every inch of today's bread. Hunger has not left. It has agreed to check back later. Dirt has not offended. It has introduced itself as a relative with excellent memory. What you begin to understand is that filth here is not a failure of manners, but a government of matter. Smoke happens because warmth matters more than elegance. Beer happens because water cannot be trusted alone. Sweat happens because the body believes in itself, even when the world does not. Clean is not a condition. It is a moment you create, and then carry forward as far as it will go. You will wipe your face tomorrow morning and call it bathing. You will change your underlinen on the day when the moon has something to say about it. You will pluck at seams like a bird correcting its nest. Somewhere in that quiet persistence is a dignity no one thinks to praise. And fatigue, the third companion at this table, does not argue. It elders you by hours, makes you older than the bread and younger than the smoke. You fold yourself towards sleep and feel the straw answer in 100 small voices. In the space between waking and dreaming, you taste salt that might be tears, or might be the memory of fish you didn't buy. The bell will speak again tomorrow. The pot will persuade. The well will bargain. The alewife will argue. Your hands will sign their names across whatever the day gives you. For now, you let your eyes close, and the village finishes the sentence you began in medieval life. You do not escape hunger, dirt, or weariness. You learn their grammar and try to speak without stammering. Faith, fear, and fire. The next morning arrives not with light, but with sound, the slow tolling of the church bell, a voice older than any man in the village. It rolls through the air like a command dressed as comfort. The first note tells you it's morning. The second tells you why it matters. You wake before you understand why you've woken, as though the bell has reached into your bones and shaken them gently awake. The woman crosses herself before she even opens her eyes, her hand tracing the gesture like muscle memory rather than thought. The child beside her mimics it, small fingers, clumsy, half prayer and half play. Outside the world is cold and grey. The path to the church is a strip of mud between the fields, lined with footprints that repeat the same shapes week after week until the earth learns them by heart. The villagers walk in single file heads, bowed not out of reverence, but out of weather. The bell continues to speak. Its rhythm is not pleading, it is absolute. You follow because not following would draw eyes, and in this world, eyes are rarely kind. The church stands on a low rise, overlooking the village built of stone that looks permanent, mostly because everything else around it isn't. Its roof is dark with age, its door heavy, its hinges sighing with each movement. Smoke from a nearby chimney mingles with the fog, carrying the faint scent of wax and damp wool. You step inside, and the air changes cooler, denser, a mixture of incense and centuries of breath. Candles burn along the altar, tiny suns in the half-dark. The priest is already there, a man of indeterminate age, whose eyes seem to have been trained to find sin the way a hawk finds movement. He wears a robe that smells faintly of smoke and sanctity, and when he speaks, It is in a language that feels like music from another room. The villagers murmur responses, words they know by sound more than by meaning. They kneel, rise, kneel again. The rhythm of worship is another kind of labor, one that ends when the priest decides your soul is properly exhausted. You imitate the motions. The floor beneath your knees is cold stone, rubbed smooth by generations of penance. The sound of prayers fills the space, a collective whisper that could be mistaken for the wind, if not for its intention. You catch fragments of meaning, mercy, forgiveness, fear. The priest raises a hand and begins to speak about sin, about the devil's cunning, about the Lord's patience wearing thin. His voice swells and dips polished by years of repetition. Each warning arrives, wrapped in reassurance. Every promise of salvation comes with an unspoken reminder that it must be paid for. When the sermon ends, the villagers line up for blessings. The priest moves among them, touching foreheads, with a thumb dipped in oil. The smell of it is sharp, earthy, almost metallic. You watch as people close their eyes when his hand passes, as though his touch alone can make the world lighter. A woman beside you whispers that her husband has fallen ill. The priest nods gravely, promises to pray, and quietly suggests she bring an offering of grain next time for the health of the household. You don't need translation to understand even grace needs maintenance. Outside, the bell tolls again, dismissing you. The villagers spill into the grey morning, talking softly, rearranging shawls and hats, returning to the tasks that actually keep them alive. The woman beside you tugs your sleeve and leads you toward a small wooden cross near the edge of the churchyard. Beneath it, offerings have been laid, a few coins, a crust of bread, a sprig of herbs. She kneels, mutters a prayer for the dead, and presses her fingers to the earth. You do the same because it feels wrong not to. The ground is cold and slightly damp. It gives a little under your touch, as though breathing back. As the week unfolds, you begin to see that the church is not just a building. It is an organ that pumps belief through the village, keeping it alive in ways the body cannot explain. The bell dictates the hours. The priest dictates the seasons. Fasting, feasting, working, resting, all spin from the axis of faith. There is a rule for every appetite and a story for every misfortune. If the crops fail, the Lord is testing them. If the child dies, the Lord is calling them home. If a man prospers, it's because God smiled. If he suffers, it's because God blinked. The logic is cruel, but it's clean. People like clean things, especially when the world isn't. At dusk, one day, a rumour arrives from a nearby village. Someone has seen strange lights in the forest, blue flickers that dance just above the ground. The priest listens, his face tightening. "Witch fire," he says, and the word spreads through the room like spilled ink. That night, the air feels heavier. Mothers pull children indoors. Men speak in lower voices. The darkness beyond the fields looks suddenly occupied. The next morning, a group of men gathers at the edge of the woods. The priest stands among them, clutching a wooden cross and a small vial of holy water. You go with the others, because everyone does. The forest greets you with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that waits to see who moves first. They search for signs, animal bones, symbols carved in bark, anything that can carry meaning heavy enough to blame. A crow takes flight suddenly, and several men cross themselves. When they find nothing, they return unsatisfied. The priest declares the danger contained by faith and sprinkles the path with water that smells faintly of iron. Everyone nods. It's easier than admitting the night might just be night. Over the following days, fear becomes another kind of weather, invisible but everywhere. The villagers begin to whisper about a widow who lives at the edge of the settlement, about her herbs, her black cat, her habit of walking at dusk. The priest visits her house. He emerges later silent, holding a small bundle of dried roots. That evening he preaches again about temptation and purity, about how the devil wears familiar faces. No names are spoken, but the space between words fills them in. The next morning, the widow's house is empty. No one asks where she went. You begin to understand how faith here is both comfort and weapon. It shelters people from the unknown, and when the unknown refuses to stay outside, it teaches them where to aim their fear. The priest's words give shape to the chaos. The villagers build walls with their belief invisible, heavy, and strong enough to last lifetimes. One evening, a storm rolls in from the west. Clouds boil above the fields. The air tastes of metal and warning. Lightning forks across the sky, sharp and close. The church bell rings, but this time the sound is different, urgent, frightened. People run through the mud, carrying what they can, muttering prayers between breaths. The priest stands in the doorway of the church, raising his cross toward the sky. Rain crashes down like punishment. Thunder answers in Latin. You huddle inside, with the others drenched and shivering. The candles flicker. The priest's voice rises over the storm, a mixture of prayer and defiance. "Deliver us from evil," he says. And the villagers repeat it again and again, until it becomes a chant, a heartbeat, a wall of sound against the wind. When the lightning strikes nearby, shaking the ground, someone screams. The priest shouts louder. The bell tolls once, twice, then falls silent, its rope burned through by fire. When the storm finally passes, dawn arrives raw and pale. The roof of one hut has collapsed. A tree smoulders near the edge of the field. The church still stands. The villagers take it as proof of divine protection. The priest says the storm was a test, and they passed. No one mentions that the lightning struck the bell tower. Faith edits as it pleases. In the days that follow, the air smells faintly of wet ash. The villagers rebuild the roof, patch the walls, and move on. The burned rope from the bell is kept behind the altar, a relic, now a reminder that destruction, when survived, becomes sanctified. The priest holds it up during service, says it's proof that the Lord's fire cleanses as well as consumes. People nod because nodding is easier than doubting. You sit near the back of the church, watching the candles tremble in the draught. You realize that every flame here has two purposes: to give light and to remind everyone how easily light burns out. The priest begins another sermon, his voice calm again, his tone measured, the rhythm familiar. The villagers listen, as they always have, as they always will. And you listen too, because the sound of certainty is its own kind of warmth. When you step outside, the sky has cleared. Smoke from a dozen chimneys climbs straight up unbothered. The air smells faintly of bread baking somewhere. For a moment, the village looks almost peaceful, a patchwork of thatch and stone and quiet faith stitched together by routine. You know it won't last, but that doesn't matter. In the Middle Ages, peace isn't the absence of fear. It's the moment between prayers, when everyone believes the last one worked. War calls you. It begins with a sound you don't recognize at first, a low rumble like thunder that has lost its patience. Then the shouting starts, carried across the fields by the wind. By the time you step outside, the entire village has already turned its head toward the same horizon. A column of dust moves beyond the trees, steady and deliberate, hooves hundreds of them pounding in rhythm. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else bolts the door. The riders arrive before the dust settles. Their armour is dull, their cloaks heavy with the colour of dried blood. They move through the village like weather, indifferent, unstoppable. At their front rides, a man whose armour still remembers polish, whose expression suggests he's forgotten what it means to doubt. His voice carries easily. The king has declared a campaign, the Lord has answered, and every able-bodied man owes service. The words fall like stones into mud. No one argues. In this world war is not a choice. It's a season. The reeve walks door to door with a list written on parchment. Names are read, some out loud, others quietly, because they no longer belong to living men. When he reaches your hut, the woman steps forward before you can move. She says something low urgent. The reeve shakes his head. His thumb smudges ink against the page. He points to you. You understand without translation. By tomorrow, you will be gone. That night, the village eats early. No one calls it a farewell. The woman ladles pottage into your bowl thicker than usual, with a slice of carrot floating like a promise. She breaks the last piece of bread and gives you the larger half. The child sits close to the fire, tracing shapes in the ashes. No one speaks much. There is nothing new to say about death. It's a topic everyone knows by heart. Before dawn, the riders return. The men of the village gather at the edge of the road, some clutching wooden staves, others carrying nothing at all. The priest blesses them, his voice steady, his eyes tired. A handful of wives and mothers stand nearby, silent. No tears, not yet. Crying is a luxury for when hope becomes inconvenient. You receive a spear and a padded tunic that smells like old sweat and damp straw. A soldier hands you a small leather strap. For your boots, he says, though you have none that fit. The march begins with no ceremony, just movement. The road winds between fields that are half ploughed, half forgotten. Birds scatter at the noise. The air grows thicker with the smell of men, horses, iron, and fear. Somewhere ahead, someone starts a tune, a soldier's song about ale and women and the lie of glory. The rhythm keeps the line moving, though the words mean less with every mile. At midday, you stop by a stream. The captain, a man who has learned to confuse obedience with strength, shouts orders. Everyone drinks, fills, flasks, wipes, sweat with dirty hands. You watch the water ripple past, clean and fast, and wonder how long it will stay that way. Beside you, a boy, no older than 15, is carving something into his spear shaft, a cross crooked but sincere. When he catches your eye, he grins. "Keeps the devil away," he says. His voice is too young to be so certain. By evening, the camp sprawls across a clearing near the woods. Fires bloom one by one, small stars in the gathering dark. You sit with a group of men around one of them, passing a skin of wine that tastes like smoke and vinegar. Someone tells a story about a siege that lasted months. Someone else says his brother died before the first arrow even flew. The laughter that follows is thin and careful, like glass over stone. The night is restless. You lie on the ground staring at a sky too vast for comfort. Every sound seems to carry meaning, the hiss of fire, the whinny of horses, the murmur of prayer. In the distance, a wolf calls once then again. You close your eyes and see the village, the hut, the cow, the flicker of the hearth. You try to fix the image in your mind before the next sunrise changes everything. When dawn comes, it comes loudly. Trumpets, orders, the crack of whips. The army moves like a single impatient animal dragging carts and banners and fear behind it. The boy with the crooked cross walks beside you, his jaw tight, his eyes bright. Ahead the road narrows into forest and the air fills with the scent of pine and anticipation. You don't know where you're going, only that it's away. The first battle doesn't look like a story. It looks like confusion. The enemy appears over a ridge, a ripple of figures moving fast, their banners snapping in the wind. Arrows whistle before you realize they've been fired. Men drop soundlessly like sacks cut from hooks. The captain shouts. Someone pushes you forward, and the world turns into noise. The ground shakes. Spears clash. The air tastes of iron and panic. You raise your weapon without thought. The first strike glances off your shoulder. The second finds someone else. The boy beside you screams a prayer and disappears into the smoke. You step over bodies mud sucking at your boots. A horse crashes nearby, its rider thrown like a discarded thought. For a moment time stretches thin, and you see everything too clearly. The sky pale and indifferent, the hands of a dying man, reaching for nothing, the blood soaking into soil that will grow next year's wheat. When it's over, you don't remember stopping. The silence that follows is worse than the noise. Men move among the fallen, searching for friends, for spoils, for proof they're still alive. The captain's voice returns, calling for the wounded to be carried, the dead to be stripped. You find the boy with the crooked cross face down in the mud, the carving still visible on his spear. You touch his shoulder, but he doesn't move. You leave him where he fell. There isn't time for anything else. That night the fires burn higher. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the iron tang of blood. Someone laughs too loudly. Someone else weeps into his hands. The captain drinks and declares victory. No one cheers, but no one argues. You sit apart, watching sparks drift upward into the dark. Every crack of the fire sounds like a question you can't answer. In the days that follow, the army moves on, leaving behind a landscape rearranged by violence. Villages burn in neat, manageable circles. Fields lie trampled, their furrows filled with ash. Crows circle low, busy and unbothered. You march through it all too tired to feel much beyond the ache in your legs. The men talk less now. Even the captain's orders sound quieter, as if the air itself has learned discretion. One morning, you pass a monastery. Its doors are closed, its windows boarded. A line of smoke rises from behind the walls, bread baking maybe, or books burning. The priest who marches with your unit crosses himself. The captain spits, the road keeps going. When the next village appears, it's half empty. The soldiers scatter through it, searching for food, wine, anything. You walk into a small chapel at the edge of the square. The door hangs crooked. Inside the air smells of old candles and fear. On the altar sits a single loaf of bread untouched. You hesitate, then take it. Hunger is a sin you can confess later. That night you dream of water, not the murky puddles of the road, but the clear, cold stream near your village. You dream of dipping your hands in, of washing the dirt away. But when you look up, the reflection in the water isn't yours. It's the boy with the crooked cross. He's smiling. You wake before you can ask him why. Weeks blur together. March, camp, fight, bury, repeat. The men who started this journey beside you have become fewer. Their faces hollow, their humour stripped to bone. When rain falls, it turns the camp into a pit of mud and fever. When the sun returns, it feels like a punishment. Disease moves faster than any army, and the healers are just men with knives and prayers. One evening, while gathering firewood, you find yourself alone at the edge of a clearing. The forest hums with insects and distance. You sit on a fallen log and listen to your own heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, there's no shouting, no clatter of metal, no command to obey. Just the sound of your breath and the memory of another life, a quieter one full of hunger and smoke and names you didn't know how to cherish. You realize that even misery has its gentler versions. When the order finally comes to return home, no one cheers. The survivors pack their silence and start walking. The road back looks different now, smaller, thinner, lined with ghosts. Villages you pass stare with the same empty windows. You recognize your own reflection in them. Days later you see the church bell tower of your village, rebuilt after the storm standing against the sky. The fields are green again, though the earth remembers. The woman is still there, older somehow. She looks up as you approach, eyes narrowing not in disbelief, but in calculation, as if deciding which part of you came back and which part didn't. She says nothing. Neither do you. That night, you sit by the fire. The pottage tastes the same. The cow breathes softly in its stall. Outside, the wind moves through the trees, indifferent, familiar. The world you left has not changed, but you have heavier, quieter, carrying a knowledge that doesn't fit into words. The bell tolls again, and you flinch before you remember you're home. The sound rolls over the village, slow and steady, a heartbeat that doesn't care who listens. You close your eyes. The war is over, they said. But in medieval life, war never ends. It just changes where you sleep. The Black Death comes. It begins with small wrongnesses that don't introduce themselves as omens. A rat in the grain bin, stiff and tidy, as if sleep had forgotten to leave. A cat that no longer patrols, choosing the hearth over the hunt. A cough that doesn't sound like the others, a deeper note, a thread of damp at the end. The miller's boy stops running when he runs messages. The alewife wipes the rim of her kettle twice. The priest adds a word to his prayers, and does not explain which one. Rumour arrives before certainty, walking in on tired legs from the market road ships in the south, with sailors who never finished their dice game. A town that shut its gates, and still could not shut out the breath of whatever this is. Carts that carried wheat outward, and came back with silence. The word pestilence fits in the mouth like a stone. People say it, and spit as if the earth can swallow it whole. The first to fall is a man whose name everyone uses when they need a tool. He is always there, always able. He comes to the well with a hand pressed to his ribs and tells the reeve he slept wrong. By afternoon he is wrong all over heat climbing, like vine's thirst that cannot find a bucket deep enough. A swelling at the groin that looks like an argument raised by the body against itself. By evening, a spot blooms at his shoulder, wine dark and mean. The priest comes with oil and words and puts both in the right places. The wife sits with her hands around her own hands. The children learn how to be quiet by trying not to breathe. In the night, the bell that usually promises the hour's obedience changes its mind and becomes the passing bell. One slow toll and then another, with too much air between them, as if the sound itself is walking a long road. The village wakes. No one sleeps again. Dawn draws a thin line across the fields. The man's door opens and does not close. Sickness spreads the way wind does visible, only where it moves something else. A boy who carried water for the mason now finds he cannot lift his own cup. A woman whose laugh always began in her shoulders no longer remembers the joke it used to follow. The swellings come where bodies join themselves. Armpit, groin, neck, hot stones, beneath the skin, followed by fever that cooks the sense out of sentences. Men talk to saints who have never heard their names. The priest walks from house to house, and the oil in his vial goes down faster than the wick of any candle. People reach for reasons as if grasping at a rope in a river. The priest speaks of sin and mercy in equal measure. The reeve speaks of keeping order. The old speak of bad air and carry sprigs of rosemary or lavender under their kerchiefs. The alewife hangs bunches of herbs above her door, that taste of old summers. Fires are lit in the lane's juniper, if anyone has it, anything else if they don't, to sweeten what the nose insists is wrong. Windows are open to let sickness out. Windows are shut to keep sickness in. Both are correct for someone. The churchyard grows busy without becoming loud. A pit is opened at its far edge where the ground drops away toward the stream. It is not deep enough then. It is deeper then. It is not enough again. Men who still breathe swing shovels with a caution that looks like reverence. The priest mutters words through a cloth held at his mouth, eyes weeping from the smoke of incense and green wood. Names are said quickly, because names take time, and time is failing its chores. A sack of lime appears from somewhere. Its dust takes the sharpness out of the smell, but not the memory that will follow the smell wherever it goes. On the third day of the pestilence, a group of strangers passes on the high road, belt stained and backs striped. They walk with the listening posture of men who are never alone because their pain keeps them company. One swings a knotted rope over his shoulder and brings it down across his skin like an instruction. Someone says they have been to 10 towns in 10 fortnights, that they whip themselves clean of the world's dirt, and the world thanks them by bleeding less. The priest watches them with a complicated face and closes the church door before their chant can find his bell tower. You help where hands are needed, because it is the only currency that spends. The woman boils water until the pot learns to expect it. She lays linen on the grass in a pale row and pours the kettle over it. Steam climbs and turns itself into breath you can trust. She gives you a cloth soaked in vinegar and tells you to hold it under your nose. And you learn that belief too can be a filter. You carry buckets to doorways and do not step inside unless you are asked. You are asked. Sometimes you lift a body that is only sleeping its last busy hour. Sometimes you lift a body that has decided to rest all at once. The child develops a fever that stands at the doorway of delirium and knocks with small knuckles. You sit through a night that does not understand what hours are for. The woman cools a brow with water that wants to warm itself on contact. She sings very softly a round of notes that turns back on itself before hope has to find a new rhyme. At dawn, the fever steps back as if it has been called elsewhere. The child sleeps the brief sleep that pays a debt in installments. You make a promise to every saint you have heard mispronounced, and to some you invent. The promise is specific, extravagant, impossible to keep if you are ever asked to keep it. You do not care. On the 7th day, the priest does not appear. The bell remains mute until someone pulls the rope with hands that do not know its stubbornness. Word passes the way words do when they need to be careful. The priest lies in the sacristy, surrounded by candles that would rather be elsewhere. A younger man from the next parish comes wearing a face that believes in future tense. He brings new oil and the same words. They sound different and mean the same. Trade stops pretending to be brave. The market unknits itself. The fishmonger does not lift his lid. His barrel is full of yesterday. The tanner's yard is quiet, except for the flies who refuse to learn our customs. 2 men with a cart move from lane to lane at dusk. They are polite at first, a knock, a name, a moment. Then they are efficient, a shoulder, a sheet, a wheel, complaining about the weight of sorrow. Nobody bargains. Coins are put into hands that cannot clench. The hands keep them. There are doors that will not open. Behind them, a candle shows itself against a seam and then retreats. Some people leave offerings on thresholds, a loaf, a cup, a lemon hoarded for feast days, laid down now, like a library book. The reeve pins bundles of straw to lintels to mark where help is needed and where caution should keep its distance. A boy learns to run without touching anything. A mother learns to weep without making sound. A cat learns to live on the other side of a wall. When the wind shifts, the whole village turns its head. The smell travels faster than grief. You get used to it the way people get used to a neighbour's habits, by noticing less in order to survive more. But there are moments that refuse to dull the felt weight of a child in your arms asleep too strangely. The particular quiet that follows the closing of a last door, the way rain darkens a fresh mound to the exact colour of a bruise. You store these moments where your sleep will find them. A second rumour arrives from the road. A city locked itself inside and left its poor outside to walk the walls with their hunger. Men in red hoods burn spices in bowls, as if the air can be taught manners. A physician somewhere has put a bird's beak over his mouth and stuffed it with cloves to trick the wind. The story sounds ridiculous and true. You repeat it exactly because you cannot bear to improve it. The woman decides to burn sweet herbs on the hearth each evening. She says nothing while she scatters the leaves. She is telling the air how to behave. You sit with the child, between you passing a cup of small beer, watching the smoke draw itself into a column, and then lose interest. The cow chews steadily, reasonably, as if appointed to demonstrate survival. The cat returns to its post. Outside, the bell is rung by hands that have just learned the rope's ways. The sound comes wrong, and then comes right. The weather shifts. Mornings arrive with a sky that has learned mercy's colour. The line at the pit shortens without vanishing. A man digs and then pauses and simply stands. Another man takes his shovel without asking. Women lay linen on low hedges and believe in the sun long enough to leave it there. The younger priest's voice grows rough. He learns the names and forgets the line between prayer and breathing. The reeve loses weight in the face first. He stops knocking. He nods and moves on. You wake one morning and cannot immediately recall the last time the passing bell spoke. The absence is almost a noise. You lie there listening, waiting for sorrow to remember its cue. When it doesn't, you step outside and stand in a day that has not earned its brightness and wears it anyway. Children appear at the edges of lanes, cautious as foxes. A woman opens her door halfway and then all the way. A man coughs the cough that belongs to the old life Woodsmoke field dust, and you do not fear it. Not everyone returns. The lane keeps its numbers close. The tithe barn counts differently now. The churchyard knows more names than the reeve's stick ever did. The younger priest leaves the old bell rope hanging behind the altar like a relic of a lesson nobody asked to learn. The woman scrubs the threshold with a fierce rag and then sets the bucket down and looks at it as if it has finally explained itself. The child draws a circle in ash and steps into it and out again to prove that circles can be escaped. In the evening, you walk to the far field where the hedges hold the last of the Sunday. The earth breathes a damp green sentence. You sit and say nothing, and do not try to make sense of fairness. Meaning is work for another season. For now there is the fact of your breath, and the way it leaves you unafraid and returns unpunished. Far off, a rat skitters along a fence post and paws his whiskers, querying the air like questions that never had answers. You watch it disappear into the grass quick and sure. When night settles, it does so gently. The sky is not kinder, but it is less cruel. A few candles burn in windows because people want to see themselves from the road and know they are still there. Somewhere a song starts, the way a creek starts nervous, then certain. The village listens and lets it go on. Half your world is gone. The other half is learning how to carry it. And beneath all of it, as always, the small feet of the remaining rats busy with their errands, reminding you that the story goes on whether we write it or not. Medicine Misery and the Mind's Last Tricks. When the fever finally loosens its hold on the village, what remains is not peace, but exhaustion that mistakes itself for it. The fields lie half-tended, the wells half full, and every doorframe bears fingerprints of ash, where hands once braced to keep balance. It is in this thin, uneven calm that the old pains return the coughs that never left, the aches from lifting and stooping, the swellings that announce themselves like forgotten debts. People begin to speak again of medicine, though the word means something different here. Medicine is not a science. It is a kind of negotiation with the unseen. The new priest's sermons still smell faintly of incense and caution, but a different authority begins to move through the lanes. The doctor, or rather the man, everyone agrees to call one. He arrives one morning from the next valley, with a mule, a sack of bottles, and a face that has seen too many deaths to still be frightened of them. His robe is stained with old remedies. His belt clinks with tools that are half holy, half hopeful. He bows to no one but the reeve who counts him as a necessity. People cross themselves as he passes, uncertain which side of God he belongs to. He sets up in an unused granary, its corners hung with bundles of herbs, sage for cleansing, wormwood for stomachs, valerian for the mind's storms. The smell inside is an argument between rot and sweetness. The doctor talks as he works in a language that seems borrowed from the monks' books, describing the four humours as if they were seasons inside the body blood: for spring, a phlegm, for winter yellow bile, for summer black bile, for the despair that clings like a shadow. Balance, he says, tapping his temple with a stained finger. All sickness is imbalance. The first patient is a farmer whose arm has swollen after a thorn cut. The doctor looks, nods, and reaches for a small knife that glints like an idea too sharp to question. He murmurs about letting out the heat. A bowl is placed beneath the wound. When the blood runs dark and eager, the doctor smiles. It leaves willingly, he says, as if praising manners. He wipes the blade on the farmer's sleeve and binds the arm with cloth that smells of vinegar and smoke. The man nods, pale but proud of his courage. He pays with a hen and leaves before the dizziness decides to speak. By afternoon, 3 more wait at the door. A woman with headaches from worry, a child who won't stop coughing, and an old man who swears something moves in his ear. For each the doctor prescribes in equal parts herbs and confidence. He writes symbols in chalk on the wall, lines them up like fences between the living and the unlucky. The villagers begin to trust him because he explains what they already fear, that sickness has rules and that someone somewhere might know them. But balance is an argument that never ends. When fever returns to a house, the doctor calls for leeches. The boy who helps him fetches a jar from the corner, and inside the creatures twist like punctuation marks, waiting for their sentence. He places them along the woman's neck. They fasten with purpose. Her husband watches, torn between belief and disgust. When the leeches are full, they fall off lazily, and the doctor drops them into a basin, where they squirm as if reconsidering faith. Better, he says. The woman tries to smile. She is lighter now, which is half the promise of healing. Across the village, another healer practices a quieter craft. She is older, her hands spotted, and her eyes clear as well water. She has no bottles, only bundles, comfrey leaves, yarrow nettle mint. People visit her at dusk when the doctor's mule is tied up, and the reeve looks elsewhere. She listens more than she speaks, offers poultices and teas, and the comfort of being believed. When asked where her knowledge comes from, she points upward and says, "From God who made the weeds." When pressed, she adds, "And from my grandmother, who was wiser than most priests." The doctor calls her dangerous, though he visits her once to borrow honey and does not return it. The priest prays for her soul and accepts her herbs when his cough grows heavy. Everyone in the village, at some time, owes her a night's rest. No one says her name too loudly. The line between miracle and mistake is narrow, and the church prefers to keep the ownership of both. Some evenings, you sit outside the hut and watch the line of smoke from her chimney twist into the twilight. The air smells of rosemary and secrecy. The child beside you plucks grass and says he dreams of birds carrying light in their beaks. You nod and tell him that dreams are the only things that can fly without wings. The woman hums over her sewing her thread, catching the last of the Sunday. Inside, the cow shifts heavy with the season's milk. Life persists, as it always does here, awkwardly, stubbornly, beautifully, indifferent to whether it makes sense. One morning, the reeve himself falls ill. His skin blooms with patches, the colour of weak ale. His tongue thickens with a language that won't obey. The doctor is called, the woman healer is not. For 3 days, the doctor bleeds him by the light of a single candle, muttering about humours that will not learn humility. On the 4th day, the reeve stops breathing. The doctor closes his eyes and declares that the corruption had reached his heart, that no man could have saved him. Everyone nods. When people want to believe in control, explanations are a form of mercy. That evening, the priest rings the bell slowly. The doctor leaves before dawn, claiming new work in another parish. The villagers wake to find the granary empty, the leeches dead in their jar, the air still thick with wormwood. They shrug. Life has other needs. The old healer returns quietly to her rounds. She tends to burns from cooking fires, to backs stiff from ploughing to children whose dreams are haunted by fevers. When she smiles, her teeth are small and brown like the roots she grinds, but her words are gentle and certain. She says healing is just a form of listening the body understands. Weeks stretch into a kind of uneasy normal. You learn to read the signs of weather not only in the sky, but in the colour of the well water and the hum of flies. The child grows taller, asks questions. The world has no grammar for why breath warms the air, why people die in winter more often than in summer, whether God forgets names when there are too many. You answer what you can, and where you cannot you invent. In medieval life, invention is another word for faith. Then, one evening, the woman pricks her finger while cutting bread. The wound is small, a red bead that dries quickly. She laughs and wraps it in a cloth. 2 days later, her laughter turns to a wince. The finger swells, the hand follows. The healer comes with a poultice of honey, and herbs lays it gently whispers prayers, that smell of time. The fever arrives like a visitor who knows the way. You sit through the night listening to her breathing, shorten, steady shorten again. The cow lows softly, as if aware that the household is holding its breath. By dawn, the fever decides it has won. The sun enters without knocking. There is no doctor to summon, no priest eager to intrude. You bury her on the small rise behind the hut where the earth meets the edge of the woods. The child places a sprig of rosemary on the mound, though winter has already warned it against optimism. You say nothing. There are no proper words left in you, only the dull certainty that pain is the only thing that never forgets its way home. In the weeks that follow, the healer visits often. She brings tease checks. The child's eyes pats your shoulder with the same patience she uses on the sick. She tells you that grief is a fever of the soul, that it must run its course. You nod, though you suspect it has no intention of ending. The evenings stretch long again. Smoke curls from your chimney and joins hers in the sky, 2 threads twisting until they lose their separate colours. The seasons begin to turn. Snow edges the fields. People speak of the next planting, the next lambing, the next reason to believe the earth still answers when spoken to. The healer tells you to drink broth and sleep often. The child learns to pray without being asked. And you who once feared sickness more than death start to see that both are just versions of change, slow, unwanted, but not without meaning. One night, While the fire settles into coals, you dream of the doctor's granary, the walls lined with jars, each holding something meant to heal. You open one, and instead of leeches or herbs, you find light thick and golden, swirling like honey. You wake before touching it, heart heavy with the sweetness of what might have been. Outside frost traces the window's edge, like the signature of someone who once promised to return. You listen for the bell, but it does not ring. The silence it leaves behind is its own kind of cure. And so the village endures again, half whole, half learning. The herbs hang drying from rafters, the well gives back water that almost tastes like forgiveness, and the air smells faintly of smoke and rosemary. People talk less about balance now. They talk about luck, about timing, about the quiet miracle of a body that wakes each morning and decides to keep working. Medicine, it seems, was never about curing. It was about staying long enough to see tomorrow. Justice and punishment. It starts as these things do with something small. A quarrel at the well, a hen that won't be found, a bundle of green sticks under your arm on a morning when every eye is out of kindness. The steward rides in from the manor with the reeve at his stirrup and a clerk behind them carrying a roll of parchment like a folded winter. The bell does not ring for this. It doesn't have to. A crowd makes itself without being asked. The steward sniffs the air as if guilt has a scent. He points at your bundle. The reeve speaks for him because power prefers to be translated. Lord's wood, he says. Cut green. He touches the leaves and lifts his hand to show their shine. You start to say the wind broke them. The child needed warmth. There was no deadfall near the lane. Explanations here are birds that fly against closed windows. The clerk clears his throat and unrolls the roll. Names wait in a column, like steps down a hill you're about to tumble. Court is held in the manor hall, a long room that smells of smoke and habits. The lord is away, his chair is not. The steward sits in it with the posture of a borrowed back. 12 men neighbours. Some you recognise by their cough stand to one side, called good and lawful, because the roll says so. They are here to say what is already believed. They do not look at you when you are named. The clerk calls the assize of bread and ale. The alewife's measure is brought and weighed against the lord's. A notch has wandered. She pays in coin, and in the way she lowers her head. A baker from the road is fined for a loaf that breaks wrong. A pig that wandered becomes an offence when it wandered into the Lord's oats. Then your turn comes, and the clerk repeats the words the reeve gave him, took green wood from the Lord's coppice, contrary to custom, to the Lord's harm. The phrase fits in his mouth easily. He has said it before. You are told to find oath helpers, men, who will swear they believe you meant no harm. Belief is a kind of currency, and you are not rich. One man shifts, then looks at the steward and reconsiders his faith. Another stares at his boots, as if truth were written there, but he cannot read. In the end, there are not enough hands to lift your word. The roll receives a mark. Amercement the steward says, and the clerk writes a number that understands your poverty better than you do. The fine is more than your week and less than your life. You offer what you have. The steward waves it away on surety, he says, and 2 neighbours are chosen to guarantee the rest with their peace of mind. You will owe them until owing runs out of calendar. The court moves on. A man is present for sharp words to his wife. He is ordered to sit the next market day in the cooking. Stool by the pond, not for pain, but for shame, which is cheaper. A tanner is warned about his pits, a miller about his toll, a beggar about his face. Each leaves smaller than he came. When the hall empties, the reeve stops you at the door. Stocks, he says, half day. So the village remembers the wood belongs to the Lord before it belongs to the fire. Mercy here is an hour counted out loud. You walk with him to the square that is not square, just an agreed-upon open place where news and humiliation ripen quickly. The stocks are already there, oiled by use and weather. You sit, the wood closes, the peg goes in like a final sentence. Children arrive first because children are weather. They whisper, point, try out jokes they've heard, but never had the chance to use. An older woman looks away, then looks back. A boy brings you a crust and pretends he didn't. By noon, the traders have opinions. A turnip finds your shoulder. A soft apple, a kindness someone didn't intend, thuds your knee. The alewife passes, and after the proper pause, slips you a swallow in a cup that never seems to be empty when it should. The steward walks by without looking. The clerk looks without stopping. Justice is a parade here, and everyone knows their step. The priest appears near afternoon, with his thin book and his thick patience. He speaks softly, as if you were ill, and not merely seen. Penance, he says, and outlines a week of early prayers, a candle to be carried barefoot on Sunday, a statement made aloud about the temptation to take what belongs to God through his appointed men. You nod, because it is easier than explaining hunger to a system that eats. Word moves, as it always does, towards suspicion with the speed of relief. The old healer's name is mentioned at a stall, how she keeps green things through winter, how her teas work faster than the priest's Latin. A black cat crosses the lane at the same time and makes theology fashionable. Someone finds a little bag of herbs tied with string behind a threshold and decides it means what fear hopes. The priest frowns, says, caution, says, charity, says, we do not judge, then preaches that evening about the devil's disguises. The space between those two sentences is big enough to hide a life. A girl falls sick, nothing like the pestilence, just a fever that takes its time. Her mother goes to the healer at dusk. By dawn, the fever breaks. Gratitude is a quiet honey in the house. Elsewhere it ferments. The reeve calls a hearing outside the church door. Not a trial, he says, only questions. The healer answers in small words. She names plants God put in hedges. She shows her hands, which are scarred the way service scars. The priest looks at the ground while she speaks. When she finishes, he asks her to stop giving what works better than his prayers. She nods once and does not. On market day, the pillory is set for a peddler who sold a knife as iron that rusted like a promise. His head and hands are pinned. The sun exacts its fee. People line up to practice scorn. It feels almost like community. Someone hangs a fish around his neck. Someone else recites a verse about deceit. You stand at the back and try not to learn the wrong lessons about belonging. At the pond, the cooking stool tilts its occupant's feet cold and public. She shouted at her husband in the lane. The lane answers her now. The crowd laughs, then coughs, then looks down. A charivari starts at dusk for a man who beats what he claims to love, pots and pans banged, until the air gives up a hood over his head, a donkey facing the wrong way, while he rides it the right one. He is paraded past your hut. The child asks if it helps. You say it makes the night shorter. Once long before the pestilence, the village used water as proof. The old men talk about it like a story they don't quite admit they told. A woman accused of lying was tied and lowered into the pond. If she sank, God had taken her side. If she floated, the devil had saved her, and shame would do the rest. No one remembers which happened. Everyone remembers the cold. The priest says the Lateran Council forbade ordeals. The pond did not get the message. When your hours end, the reeve pulls the peg, and the stocks forget you. The holes where your ankles were keep the shape of you for a heartbeat and then return to being wood. The square breathes. It is ready for the next lesson. You stand blood returning in prickles, and the world is briefly unsteady, like a prayer said too fast. The alewife's boy appears with a heel of bread and the face of someone who wants to be kind without being seen doing it. You take it. The rule here is simple. You ration mercy as if it were food, and sometimes it becomes food. On Sunday, you make your rounds barefoot with the candle, as told. Wax climbs your hand and claims a small patch of skin for memory. You say your piece in front of the church, the words polished by repetition. You erred, you repent. You will not err where you can be seen again. The congregation listens. With the discipline of people who know their turn is never impossible. The priest nods, and the bell gives one approving note that sounds like closure written on air. By evening the square is only a square, the pond only a pond, the hall only a room, where taxes change coats. Yet the shape of the day remains. You understand more than you want to, that justice here is a theatre for order and punishment its ticket price. Truth looks on from the doorway, like a child too short to see over the crowd. You walk home with the bundle of dead sticks. The reeve allows you now careful the whole way not to break one more than you've paid for. Night in the Middle Ages. Evening falls the way an old blanket drops from tired hands, slow, uneven, gathering everything beneath it, whether invited or not. The sun lowers behind the hills, its last light filtered through smoke from hearths and the faint mist that always rises from the marsh. The village changes shape. Work becomes memory. Voices soften. The air holds its breath thick with wood smoke milk and the sharp tang of iron cooling after a day of tools. You carry in the last bucket of water, its surface reflecting a slice of red sky. Inside the hut, the fire burns low, its glow the only argument left against darkness. The woman's empty stool still waits beside it, and though months have passed since she left, you still turn your head sometimes when the door creaks, half expecting the sound of her cough, her small, impatient sigh, as she stirred the pot. The child sits near the hearth tracing patterns in the dirt floor with a stick. Each line catches the light for a moment before disappearing back into shadow. The day's noise has folded itself away. Beyond the walls, the fields are a sheet of black. The village no longer feels like a collection of homes, but a single creature exhaling through many chimneys. Dogs bark in the distance, a thin thread of sound that fades before finding an answer. Somewhere a bell rings once, not for prayer or death this time, but as if testing whether anyone still listens. You light a candle from the fire and watch the flame take small at first, then steady. Its flicker paints the walls in amber and ghosts. Shadows of the tools dance sickle broom, the curve of the pothook, and for a moment they seem alive, carrying on the work your body has finished. The child hums softly, a tune learned from the healer, something about the moon being an old shepherd, keeping the stars from wandering off. The sound is thin but comforting, like breath against frost. Outside night is not empty. It has a pulse. Wind slides through the cracks in the walls and presses cool fingers against your neck. From the forest an owl calls, a single, deliberate note that travels farther than daylight ever manages. You can almost hear the reply from across the valley. Another owl, another question, sent into the vast dark. You envy their certainty, the way they speak, without worrying who listens. At the far end of the hut, the cow stirs, shifting on its straw bed. Its weight and warmth are reminders that life is still busy somewhere beneath the silence. You feed it a handful of hay whisper, a wordless comfort, and it exhales against your hand, slow and wet, like a blessing translated into steam. The child giggles at the sound. You realize you haven't heard laughter in days, and the realization hurts more than hunger ever did. When you step outside, the cold greets you with the familiarity of an old friend who never left. The moon has risen, thin, deliberate, watching. The sky is a quilt of stars, countless, indifferent, astonishing. No torch burns in the lane. No one can spare the oil. The darkness is total, but not cruel. You walk by memory more than sight. The village is reduced to smell and sound, the sweet smoke of peat, the sharp cry of a baby, the whisper of someone praying for what the day forgot to give. At the edge of the square, a group of villagers huddles around a shared candle. They speak of spirits of foxes, of a light seen near the churchyard that might be a soul or a trick of air. The old man swears he saw a shape near the pond where the stocks stand tall, still watching. The priest says, the dead rest easy if the living do which satisfies no one. The group disperses slowly, each person carrying a little more fear, home like coals from a dying fire. You linger. The night has its own conversations, reeds whispering by the pond, frogs arguing in the shallows, the creak of the gallows beam, repurposed long ago for hanging nets. It's strange how sound moves differently after sunset. In daylight, it travels with purpose. At night, it wanders. The silence isn't absence. It's fabric woven from 1,000 tiny noises that only the sleepless notice. Back in the hut, the candle has burned low. The child sleeps, curled beneath the old blanket hair, spread like spilled ink across the straw. The cow breathes slow and steady. The rhythm becomes contagious. You find yourself matching it inhale and exhale until your body believes it is safe to rest. You sit by the fire's last glow and think of all the nights that came before this one, and how they have all felt almost the same cold, the same sounds, the same ache in your hands, and yet each carries its own small fingerprint, a difference you can feel but never name. From the distance comes the howl of a wolf. The sound passes through you, low and deliberate. The child stirs but doesn't wake. You add a log to the fire, the last one you can spare, and watch it catch with slow reluctance. Sparks rise and vanish, small meteors trying to reach the roof. You remember the stories the healer used to tell the ones about souls travelling in sparks, brief lights returning to the sky they fell from. You never believed them, not really, but tonight you want to. You lie down on the straw beside the sleeping child. The roof above you creaks as the wind shifts and bits of dust fall like tiny snow. You trace patterns on the wooden beam with your eyes, old carvings, accidental or deliberate, impossible to tell. Someone long before you left marks here, a name perhaps, or just a shape they wanted to see again. It comforts you to think of another body lying exactly where you are, listening to the same wind, wondering the same things. In this way, time feels less cruel, almost companionable. Sleep comes slowly, hesitant. You drift in and out, half in dream, half in memory. You dream of the woman again, not the night she left, but the morning before, when she turned to you at the doorway and laughed because the child had spilled water on the floor. You remember the way her hair caught the light, the smell of bread that never quite finished baking. You wake with tears that don't feel entirely your own. The candle dies quietly. Darkness takes its place without malice. Somewhere outside the church bell gives a single uncertain toll, as if remembering a duty it no longer believes in. You pull the blanket closer and listen to the world continue. There is always movement mice in the straw, the creak of wood settling the faint pulse of your own blood. You think of all the things that never stop living, even when no one notices. The roots pushing through frozen earth, the slow growth of moss on the church wall, the stars crossing the sky above fields. no one will see until morning. In this hour, the village feels suspended between one breath and the next. Every soul, sleeping, praying, dreaming, floats in the same fragile pause. The dark doesn't threaten, it shelters. For the first time in months, you realize you're not afraid. Not of sickness, not of hunger, not even of the silence that waits beyond sleep. You let your eyes close. The wind softens. The cow sighs. The child murmurs something you can't understand. The night folds around all of it, careful, protective, like hands cupped around a flame. And as you drift towards sleep, the last thought that passes through you is simple, almost gentle in the Middle Ages. Surviving the day is labour, but surrendering to the night is grace. Morning will come again, as it always does, slow and without apology. The bell will remember its purpose. The hearth will wake with a thin orange breath, and the lanes will gather their familiar footprints as if last night never dared to happen. A day in the Middle Ages is not a single story. It is a braid, hunger and habit, faith and fear, mud and memory, twisted together until they hold. You began in a room of straw and smoke a stranger to your own hands. You learned the grammar of the village, how a yoke sits on the shoulders, how an empty bowl still teaches gratitude, how the well bargains and the alewife argues, how bread can be both tool and truce. You learned that work here is not a decision, it is a season without end. You climbed, too, the invisible ladder that holds this world together. At its top, a lord you never met. At its base, a body you must persuade to continue. The reeve's tally stick the steward's horse. The clerk's rolled winter of parchment, each a reminder that power prefers to be counted before it is questioned. You learned how a fine can be heavier than a stone, how silence can be safer than truth, how the distance between obedience and survival is only the width of a breath held at the wrong moment. In the manor's shadow, even smoke seemed better fed. You ate what the land allowed and what luck forgot to take. You learned that water speaks with two tongues, one clean and one that must be tamed, and that beer is less a pleasure than a strategy. You scrubbed a pot with ash and called it enough. You bartered hope at the market for the price of salt and rumour. You met the small republic of vermin that claims every seam as a border, and you negotiated not for victory but for sleep. You discovered that filth is not failure here. It is government smoke for warmth, sweat for proof, dirt for the honest signature of labour. Clean, when you found it was a moment you created and carried forward like a flame cupped in two hands. You knelt in the church's cool breath and listened to certainty, speak Latin. The bell parcelled the day, the priest parcelled the blame. The candles made a map of light, small enough to memorize. You watched fear dress itself in doctrine and comfort, be rationed as carefully as flour. When thunder claimed the tower rope, the village called it a lesson and kept the charred length as a relic, because survival once named becomes holy. You saw how faith shelters and sharpens, how it makes walls of words and doors of mercy, how it forgives the storm after counting the roofs that remained. War found you the way, weathered as sudden, impersonal, and convinced of its own necessity. You marched the King's Mile with strangers who became quieter versions of themselves. You learned the noise of battle, and the silence after the wet arithmetic of mud and blood the way victory is announced, with a voice already hoarse from denying the cost. You left pieces of yourself along the road, some near a stream that tasted of iron, some in a boy's crooked cross, some in a chapel where the bread waited and you did not. When you returned, the village had not changed its mind about you. It had simply kept living. That is the truest welcome the poor can afford. Then the pestilence came the night without a sky. You heard the passing bell forget the hour and remember the body. You watched names move faster than shovels, watched windows argue with air, watched grief learn to be quiet so the living could hear their own instructions. You learned that love here is measured in buckets carried and doors opened in candles left at thresholds and herbs burned to teach the wind manners. You learned that half a world can vanish and the other half must learn to carry it. After medicine returned in the shapes, it could manage leeches and Latin weeds and wisdom. You saw one healer bleed the reeve toward death and another coax sleep from nettle and honey. You discovered that cure is a word for city stories. In a village, healing is staying long enough to see tomorrow. You buried the woman whose laughter kept the hearth square, and you kept moving because movement is the first and last treatment the body understands. You counted evenings by smoke columns yours, and the healers twining into a single rope that held the sky politely in place. Justice called your name and taught you its theatre. You sat in stocks so the village could rehearse virtue. You carried a candle barefoot to remind your feet who owned the road. You watched a crowd practice scorn as if it were a trade, heard suspicion, pronounce a woman's herbs in the devil's accent, learned how shame can be cheaper than rope and more useful than truth. You learned the rule, most people never say out loud order is the story we tell, so tomorrow knows where to find us. And then each night the dark, the owl's single question, the cow's warm breath, the child's murmured dreams spilling like ink across straw. You learned that night is not the opposite of day, it is its witness. Day proves you can endure. Night proves that surrender done gently is also a form of courage. In the quiet you found company footsteps of mice, the roof's soft settling stars, walking their patient routes over fields that will never learn their names. You discovered that fear can loosen its grip without leaving, and that sleep, when it chooses you, is the kindest verdict of all. So, could you last a day in medieval life? Perhaps you already have in this story, in this breathing, in the humble arithmetic of work and waiting. But the truth is simpler and heavier. Most people didn't last here. They continued. They made a treaty with hunger and weather and power. They bet on habit when hope was expensive. They carried one another farther than they could carry themselves. And in the ledger that survives, where straw and smoke and prayer are counted without sentiment, that is what a good day meant. The morning came and you were still here. If this quiet walk through another century helped you rest, if the bell, the bread, the mud, the mercy found their way into your pulse, stay with us. Please like this video so the story reaches someone who needs a softer way into history tonight. Subscribe to Sleepless Historian if you want more journeys told at this pace, more lives measured in small, exact acts of endurance. Tap the notification bell so the next time we light a candle in the past, you'll see it from your window. And if a moment stayed with you, a sound, a face, a sentence, share it in the comments. Tell us what surprised you, what steadied you, what you'd like to hear next. The kitchens of a castle at midnight, the road songs of pilgrims, the secrets a monastery keeps between its bells. Stories are how the living hold the hands of the dead without letting go of the present. Your words help that circle close. Until the next night, keep a small kindness within reach, a warm cup, a gentler breath, a light you can cup in your hands. History will still be here when you wake. And so, I hope, will we waiting by the fire, speaking softly, letting the past do what it does best, when treated with patience, teach us how to last.